Let's look at the HTML code of the form. We'll keep the JavaScript code visible as we go through this. This code portion only contains 2 input fields, but the rest are pretty similar. The name field has a label. The for attribute tells us what input the label corresponds to. It uses the ID, not the name, but the ID of the desired input element. The input is a text field of size 31 that takes a maximum of 45 characters. The ID and name attributes are both the same, and the value of the field is an expression from the Java expression language. Recall that the first part of a Java EL expression involving a dot operator, well, actually, let's take a step back. There are 2 kinds of things that precede a dot operator in a Java EL expression. If I give you 10 seconds, can you tell me what they are? In fact, you should be able to tell me what the 2 kinds of things are that can follow a dot operator in a Java EL expression also. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it, or you can pause the video. Ready? The text before the dot is either an EL implicit object or an attribute, and the text after the dot is either a property or a key if first is a map. And while we're on the subject, here are a few reminders. Most EL implicit objects, in fact all but one, are maps. The only implicit object that is not a map is the page context. Also, if the text before the dot operator is not an implicit object, it is an attribute that belongs to one of 4 attribute scopes. And again, since we're on the topic, if I give you 5 seconds, can you tell me what are the 4 attribute scopes? 5 seconds to think or pause the video starting from now. Okay, the 4 attribute scopes are application scope, the attribute is global to the application; session scope, the attribute exists for the duration of a session in which the users can access multiple web pages; request scope, the attribute exists only for the duration of the request; and page scope. The attribute can only be accessed from a particular page. Let's get back to our discussion of the form on the checkout page. We were talking about the EL expression param.name. In this case, param is not an attribute. Param is an implicit object that contains a mapping of all the request parameters. So param.name refers to the request parameter with the name name. The normal way of getting to the checkout page is from the cart page. When you navigate to the checkout page from the cart page, you don't send any request parameters. You do store a session attribute of the cart object, but you do not send any request parameters. So where would this request parameter called name come from? In fact, I'll give you 5 seconds to think about that question, starting from now. Okay, the answer is that it comes from the very element you're looking at, the name element in this form. When the form is sent, request parameters for each of the form elements are sent to the server. If there's a problem with form validation, the server will not proceed to the confirmation page, but instead it will return to this page. Upon return to this page, the request parameters will be the same as those sent from the form. This means that even though the page reloads, the values entered into the form by the users will still be there. Remember that the attribute value in an input field indicates the default value that appears in the field. Okay, there's one more element I want to talk about in the context of this form, and that is the drop-down list. Here's the code for the drop-down list. It involves a JSTL for each loop that iterates from 1 to 10 and creates an option for each number. It assigns the region number to the value attribute for each option, which means that the value of city region will be the number, and it places the region number in the text of the option element, which means that the region numbers will be what are displayed when the user opens up the drop-down menu. The only slightly odd thing we see here is that JSTL if statement. But this relates back to seeing the same information when the page reloads as the result of a server-side validation error. The if statement simply indicates that the number selected after loading the page will be the city region request parameter if it exists. If the city region request parameter is 4, the select code will be equivalent to something like this. Note that the request parameters here and in the input elements are not relevant to the JavaScript validation because the page does not reload during that process. The JavaScript validation is accomplished entirely on the client side.